Hi, folks. As a third-generation white settler, I'm recording this on the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. I want to recognize that Tecronto is part of the District 1 Spoon Treaty, which is a covenant that predates colonization, and it invites all people to share and protect the land. So as treaty people, we carry this responsibility to honor the ongoing relationship with the land and people that we have here in Toronto. Simply saying a land acknowledgement isn't enough. We really need to be actively breathing life into taking radical care of each other and reducing harm to the land and waterways that sustain us. The principles of harm reduction and meeting people where they're at is just one way that we can honor our treaty responsibilities. It involves not just addressing immediate needs, but also working to heal the impacts of colonization, which takes time, but it takes us to really lean into it. And although we're meeting in a virtual space right now, this communication is made possible through infrastructure that is built on lands taken without consent and through a significant extraction of fresh water to support digital networks that are transporting this data as I speak and as you watch or listen. As community workers, it's critical to question all extractive relationships, whether they involve the land or the vulnerable people that we work with. As a tool of colonization, extractivism, whether it takes the form of resource exploitation or the exploitation of individuals' labor, stories, or needs, it upholds the violence of colonization, and that leaves many marginalized and harmed. So I want to invite us all to critically examine who profits from these dynamics and who bears the brunt of the harm, because we can challenge systems of inequality and work toward a more equitable, restorative practice in community. So through this lens, we can dismantle harmful systems and support communities in reclaiming their agency and power. So thank you, Miigwech, and let's get into the conversation. All right. Hi, folks. My name is Bea. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm going to be welcoming you to the Harm Reduction News podcast. So thanks for tuning in. I'll be your host and your moderator. Again, my name is Bea, and I'm joined today by our regular guest, Dave, who is a shelter worker with Dixon Hall and co-facilitator of the Harm Reduction News podcast. Good to see you, Dave.
It's always a pleasure and a privilege to be on the show, Bea.
Oh, thanks. That's very exciting. So of course we'll be joined later by some of our expert guest panels to provide some critical feedback on media narratives that are going on in harm reduction right now. It's super timely, absolutely. But Dave, do you want to tell us what's going on in the news, maybe?
I'm so glad you asked, Bea. It's a time of dramatic news right now. Can you cut to slide one? There's two pieces that I want to show people. And I know we're mostly about covering news. These are actually sourced from a journalistic point of view. These are sources of news. Okay, and the first one is from Street Health. It's about the Ministry of Health announcement about the closing of 10 supervised consumption sites, which are located within 200 meters of schools and childcare centers. And this is scheduled to kick. No, this announcement is from August 22nd, 2024. So it's not new news, but this is what's going on right now because this is scheduled to take effect after March 31st, 2025. 10 supervised consumption sites which are located within 200 meters of schools and childcare centers are scheduled to be closed. Regent Park Community Health Center, Parkdale Queen West, South Riverdale, and The Works, which is a big one, and the Kensington Market overdose prevention site. Now, street health isn't affected because the OPS site is licensed through the federal government and has not received provincial funding since 2019. These closures are going to have a huge impact on the downtown community members, especially homeless people. The announcement prohibits the opening of any new life-saving consumption and treatment services in the province and fell short of stating on how the ongoing toxic drug supply issue will be addressed. There's a lot of death from opioids, and harm reduction is a solution to that, and it's being cut. And it's not really clear what is going to replace it in terms of meeting people where they live. But let's look at what the government of Ontario has in mind. Can you cut to slide 2, Bea?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Through the magic of editing.
The Ontario government is creating a homelessness and addiction recovery treatment heart setup of hubs. Let's see, what do they have? What do they have going on? Hub clients are those with complex service needs, i.e. those experiencing a range of overlapping issues and marginalization, including homelessness, substance use, mental health, social service support needs, and unemployment. They have a cute little drawing here. It's a circle. Step 1, somebody struggling with addiction. Step 2, you purchase drugs. Step 3, visit a site. And step 4, administer drugs. And this is a vicious circle. I don't know. This looks pretty simplistic to me. I just don't see how this replaces harm reduction. I'm wondering if our expert guest panelists would want to comment on these 2 news articles.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting the way that they've said, oh, like this will just replace it. This is like a fix. But I have some little bios. If I can maybe share bios of our guests before we jump into discussion, because I'm really excited about them today. Give me 1 second, I'll switch over my screen here. Yeah, so you've got Monica Forrester and Amina Mohammed. Thank you so much both for being here. I am beyond excited to be able to chat with you today. But I'll do some short bios and then we can jump into the discussion. So Monica Forrester is a two-spirit trans woman of color who has been working for 27 years in community services, directly running harm reduction programs to people who are experiencing homelessness and folks who use drugs. Currently, Monica is working at Street Health here in Toronto in harm reduction, coordinating the drop-ins, and she mentors community members in the Doorway Project. Monica works with Two Spirit of the First Nation as Supervisor of Harm Reduction Outreach Services, working with the Indigenous population who are experiencing homelessness and may be using drugs. And Monica is the founder of Trans Pride Toronto 2004, working with trans and two-spirit people that are marginalized and racialized. So thank you, Monica, for joining us. And Amina Mohammed is a community artist, performer, DJ, anti-oppression facilitator, and community organizer, currently based in Toronto. She is passionate about and committed to creating welcoming and accessible communities. Amina is the Women's Community Program Coordinator at PASAN, also here in Toronto, and she provides education, advocacy, programming, and case management to incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women living with HIV. She is the lead artist facilitator with Confluence Arts, a multidisciplinary collective of artists who aim to open up humanizing spaces to explore and articulate who we all are outside of and because of criminal convictions, so social marginalizations and situations of incarceration. Amina's orientation towards centering inclusivity in spaces that promotes resiliency and healing is grounded in her experience of marginalization, poverty, erasure, and occupying a disposable body. So thank you both for being here. And I think I'll pass it back to all of you to get our discussion going.
Okay, well, thank you once again, you guys, for having me on the podcast. Um, yeah, as we are, going into a new phase of how we're supporting people that use drugs, it's really a lot of agencies and workers within the field are really stressed, right? There's so much going on, especially the people that use drugs, right? So they don't have a voice in this conversation around what they need. You know what I mean? We know clearly that harm reduction works, it saves lives, you know, but we have a government, a conservative government, that feels that, harm reduction is just promoting more harm towards people and escalating the overdose crisis within our city, our province. Um, and this is frightening, like personally frightening for me, frightening for staff, frightening for people that are using drugs. These closures are life saving supports that really people need to stay alive so they can check their drugs where they can have it's not only using in these sites but it's also the supports, it's the community they build within those sites that make it so vital for their everyday life. So a lot of us in the communities are really strategizing. Like, we know numerous sites are being closed, especially in Toronto, that they see like, hundreds of people weekly, and how this is really going to affect the lives of people going forward. And as you said earlier, I've been in the harm reduction community for 27 years, and harm reduction works. It allows people to use in dignity, it allows people choices, agency to their lives, and it's meeting people where they're at, right? And it's unfortunate we're having a toxic drug supply that's killing lots of people, but it's not the faults of the people using drugs. It's where the drugs are coming from. I fully believe in regulation of drugs, that people can use safe drugs, you know what I mean, and stay alive, but also access supports. And when the Ford is saying, it's really looking at this as a scope, and yes, there was a woman that was murdered in South Riverdale area, and it's very unfortunate, but it's coming down upon the people that use drugs as the fault of this, you know, um, which is really, unfortunate, right? So, and I'll just pass it on to Amina to everyone their thoughts.
Great. Thank you, Monica. Yeah, just as Monica is saying, like harm reduction works. It's evidence-based, it's client-centered, and it's been working for a really long time. I think that like harm reduction and treatment is a spectrum. And so I think that there's space for the heart hub within this umbrella of harm reduction. I don't think we need to replace safe consumption sites with the heart hub. I think there are people that want to use and want to use safely, and then there are people who don't want to use, right? There are people that want to seek treatment, and I think the government focusing on that is a positive, but just putting all money and redirecting funding to that isn't going to help anybody. It's just a harmful model. And we're just going to see more deaths in the streets. And if the issue was that, it's unfortunate that somebody died, but there's a lot of gun violence in Toronto. There's tons of gun violence in Toronto, and this is the first time that we're seeing, gun violence lead to some policy change, which is interesting. And there's just tons of violence in the downtown East Core, and that has nothing to do with drug use. We just have there's a lot of guns in the city, and there's a lot of criminal activity, and a lot of it is rooted in poverty, right, and lack of access to employment, lack of access to education, lack of access to opportunities. There's a larger dialogue around the violence, and it isn't about harm reduction. In terms of harm reduction, like I come from Alberta, and so I come from a very backwards province, and so we're kind of following Alberta in this. Like when I was younger, I lived in an area similar to Moss Park in Edmonton that had a high level of drug use, a high level of sex work, and street involvement. And what the city decided to do was to get rid of where we had like needle, places where you could put needles in, and so they decided to get rid of those as a method. They thought, oh, us allowing folks to use drugs is the issue. If we got rid of places where they could place their needles, then we'll get rid of drug use. And the outcome of that was that the little kids were finding needles in parks. And so this backwards politics actually only creates more harm and more backlash onto drug users. And so I see it as a way of scapegoating drug users, actually. We're going to have a lot more people upset with drug users once we get rid of the community supports that have been put in place to support, to actually proactively deal with that. And then the other issue is these consumption sites provide more than just a safe place for people to use. It's places there's people. I have tons of clients. I work with people who are criminally involved and do not feel comfortable or safe in hospital settings or institutional settings. And so a lot of my clients will come to me for primary care, and I'm not a nurse. I just have first aid treatment. And often I will send my clients to these OPS sites and these safe consumption sites because there are nurses there. There are places where people can get primary care. There are places where people can get connected to supports. And I know for a fact that my clients won't be visiting these heart hubs. And so it's just going to put more of a burden on the existing agencies that are doing this work. And yeah, it's backwards. It's not helpful, and it's not supporting anybody. And it's just going to create a bigger tension in the downtown east between the economically affluent community that lives there and the drug users that have been historically there.
Thank you so much, Amina. Now, I've noticed that we have questions from our viewers, but I want to ask you both a couple of questions if you could respond to, and then I'll leave it to you. One is, I've noticed that the heart hubs offer rehabilitation and housing services more than harm reduction. What's your take on that? It seems to me there is no housing and there's a queue for rehabilitation, but you're frontline workers. I want to hear what your take on that is. And also, I'd like to hear from how you expect, from your knowledge and experience and research and connections, how the EMS system is going to be overloaded as a result of the new changes. If it's going to be overloaded, do you think it's going to be overloaded, and what will the impact of that be? Maybe on a positive note, that will guide our provincial legislators to reintroduce harm reduction, to take the stress off of EMS. Those two questions to both of you.
Okay. Well, for the heart hubs, like Amina was saying, yes, it's great that we can have services that people, if they want to transition out of drug use or have those supports to, or that advocacy to do that it's important. We know for years, there hasn't been enough treatment centers and supports for people that are trying to either exit drug use, right? So that's the first issue that's been happening. That's been ongoing. There's always never enough services for people that need those supports. So my only concern with the heart hubs is, like you were saying, there is no housing. So how does housing look? You know what I mean? When we're saying, oh, we're going to get you housing, we're going to get you into these treatment centers. We haven't heard the Ford government talk about new housing. We haven't heard the government say that they built some new facilities or extended it within either hospitals or other services. You know what I mean? So this is something I've seen when I look back at the trafficking initiative that the federal government did for a lot of agencies, giving them millions of dollars. Because I worked at one of those agencies because I've been a sex worker, was a sex worker for 30 plus years. And I know there's a lot of sex workers that would want to transition out of sex work, but didn't have the means to do it. So I was working with an agency I'm not going to name, but they got a bunch of that money, and the promises were the same. We'll get you housing, we'll get you employment, we'll help you financially. And so people were going first. There was no traffic people coming in because that was something that they kind of said, oh, we have a lot of traffic people, but it wasn't. We had like maybe 1% of people that might have been trafficked, and about 99% of sex workers that wanted to transition out of sex work. Um, and unfortunately, so when they said housing, they were like, well, you have to go stay in a shelter. Right? So they were actually making spaces and shelters for people. Oh, well, we can put you through life skills programming, but we can't guarantee you any outcomes, right? So it's these programs that have a lot of like fluff to them, like, you know what I mean, for people that really generally were like, yeah, maybe it's time to transition into whatever that looks like. You know what I mean? But the resources are not there. So that's what I'm worried about, that, we're pouring all this money into these agencies and giving people that hope that want to transition out of drug use these ideas that this is going to happen overnight, that we're going to have housing, we're going to have all these services to get our lives back on track, and to fail, right? So
But
that's
it's a
what
false
I'm really
promise.
looking. Well, yeah, so that's what I'm really gonna see what's gonna transpire as the sites close at the end of the month, to see, you know what I mean? And I've talked to a few of these agencies that have gotten the hard hub, and they're still waiting for the money. Some of them are. They really have, and then some of them are not even actually doing anything until they get the money, right? So how long is that transition gonna take for actually when they're gonna see people moving from you know what I mean, from the social location that they're in to this new promised services that are expected, right? Secondly, um, you know, to force people without their will to actually access these services, I feel it's like against their own human rights. You know what I mean? That they're forcing people, putting people at high risk of their health. You know what I mean? I know as an ex-addict that quitting drugs is not something that you just wake up in the morning, I'm going to quit. You know what I mean? First of all, you might have dependency, especially if you're doing work using opiates. It's not something, you have all the physical side effects of opiates when you don't use them, right? So there's so much at stake when it comes to people being pushed out of services that are actually supporting them, or having these other services like what is it called? The services is where they are regulating drugs. What's it called? Oh god, sorry. Um,
Like
it's a program that food.
safe supply,
Pardon?
safe supply.
Thank you. Safe supply program, which it actually works. It actually gives them, you know what I mean, drugs that are actually safe to use. And we have seen statistically people have been weaned off of those, or have actually gotten their lives together. People are, you know what I mean, have taken steps to either maintain their housing, or, you know what I mean, get back to work. So some of the things that they weren't being able to do, where we're seeing these successes, these small successes, but at the end of the day, saving lives. You know what I mean? So once again, I don't oppose the hard hubs. You know what I mean? I really feel there are people that probably want to transition out of drugs and get their lives on track, but I'm just really optimistic of what that's going to look like. You know what I mean, with these services and how they're going to be rolled out and when they're going to be rolled out, right? And to the other question around, EMS, we're already seeing an overload at time. When we talk about time, I was seeing something on the news that EMS they're trying to get them to locations quicker than what they are. So you know what I mean. That's just going to be another mess you know what I mean, when we think about EMS people being overloaded with all these 911 calls of overdoses. I was just I do outreach, so we have a lot of homeless people, people that use drugs, actually staying in the waiting rooms of hospitals already, right? For, you know what I mean, to get out of the cold, to sleep. You know what I mean? So it's just gonna be, yeah, it's gonna be terrible. You know what I mean? So, like I said, right now we're strategizing with the outreach teams. How are we? That's gonna put us, more people on the ground to actually making sure that we're in areas where people are using drugs, that we have X amount of naloxone available for people, that we have those supports, because like you said, not a lot of people are going to go to these hard hubs. You know what I mean? So they're going to still be using in areas that they are comfortable in using. We're going to have to map out a new strategy of outreach of like, you know what I mean? Meeting people where they're at, because, people, once we get these hard hubs going, policing and criminalization is going to even be more, you know what I mean? Even higher. So, people are going to be, displaced, which is going to put, overdose is even another higher risk, right? There's just so many things that are actually putting people's lives at risk. So.
Yeah, and yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, in terms of housing, it is a false promise. Like a lot of the work that I do is trying to, like do release planning for folks, connect people to housing. I'm well aware of the 10-year backup with the city. Like priority housing is really hard to find. Specialized housing is dependent on, what qualities you have, So like I work in HIV, and even looking for specialized HIV housing is really difficult. And it becomes even increasingly more difficult looking for people who are criminalized with a history of drug use, because they are well known by the sector and folks don't want to house those people. And so I often will call and try to make a referral for specific clients, like my most precarious clients, and it requires a lot of advocacy. So I'm curious to see how that's going to work, given that we don't have housing and a lot of the shelters are being displaced to Scarborough in order to use the downtown East 4 for condos. So we're already seeing a lot of these resources being pushed out. And so where is this housing going to be? Is it going to be in the GTA? Is it going to be in the downtown core? So that's definitely an interesting promise. Yeah, looking at like what they're saying they're doing is housing supports and stabilization, addiction recovery programs, mental health counseling and psychiatric care. Specifically, mental health counseling and psychiatric care is also very difficult to find at the moment. Referral times for that are very difficult. I'm not sure if they're going to be, yeah, are you planning to retrain and hire folks? I'm not, yeah. So all of this, and to speak to what Monica said, yeah, Monica is already has the information that the agencies that are transitioning to the HEART model haven't received the money, haven't received any guidelines, haven't received any guidance as to what to do. So the existing infrastructure is going to close at the end of this month. And then we're going to be sitting in limbo, waiting on the province to fill that gap with whatever they see fit. And in that interim period, we're going to see a lot of death, and we're going to see a lot. And if the issue was having these sites near kids and near schools, like that is going to amplify. There's going to be drug use on school campuses. There's going to be drug use in parks. There's going to be drug use everywhere. There's going to be drug use in the washrooms at McDonald's. It's gonna amplify. It's gonna be a universal experience for all Torontonians moving forward. And that's only going to create more tension in terms of what the impact is going to be on EMS. I remember years ago when a lot of the dialogue around when the carfentanil crisis was exploding, and there were EMS folks dying. And I think I'm not sure, but for me, that was the moment where I think the province was like, okay, we have to create some other model, because there was so much outrage and backlash on these, frontline workers, these amazing heroes dying because of drug use. And that's just going to return, that we're going to have that same impact. And the unfortunate part is, like, I love frontline workers, I love EMS workers, but they're not the most compassionate towards drug users either. I have seen, someone overdosing, and then I've called EMS, and they are casually sauntering over. And I'm like, can you hurry up? Like, this person is overdosing, and they're like, don't talk to me that way. And like there's classism, there's a lot of racism, there's a lot of things that are going to be isms that will be coming up in those interactions that those folks do not deserve to experience while they're overdosing and while they're receiving care. And that's why the people at the OPSs are so important, because they're trained in harm reduction. They believe in the philosophy of harm reduction, and they believe in supporting people and meeting them where they're at. Unfortunately, I assume that moving forward, the people that get employed in the HART model are going to be people that don't come from community services backgrounds, people that don't come from lived experience, people that don't have social services backgrounds. We're seeing, slashing of programs already with the assaulted women's program getting slashed. Like, we're seeing the province move in a direction where they don't want frontline workers to have compassion and care. And so I'm assuming that the people that are going to be working in this are going to be similar to the folks that work in corrections and similar to the folks that work in hospitals and all of these other institutions that are callous and unkind to people that use drugs. And so, yes, I think there's going to be an overwhelming impact on EMS, but I think, unfortunately, the larger impact is going to be the callousness that people that use drugs are going to be feeling.
Absolutely. Sorry. I was
No,
just
I
going to
just
jump in
wanted
for a sec. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to tell that, like, this reminds me so much of the 80s. Yes, I'm old. But when the Moroni government was in place and we were at the height of the AIDS crisis, and they were doing campaigns like "Stop Drugs, Stop Sex," but did people do that? No, you know what I mean. So we know, like I said, if these were programs that were, implemented with these with these OPSs or SRSs, or uh, that would give people more opportunity. You know what I mean? If they were giving more money directly to these safe consumption sites to have those services available, you know what I mean, would be great. And like, there are people, like I said, that a lot of these staff work with that want to maybe eventually stop drugs, and or even the process to do that is like, you're on a waiting list, or we can't help you right now. There's no beds available for treatment, right? So once again, it's like, we're all just sitting here wondering what this is going to look like, and you know what I mean, and when these programs are going to be implemented. Yeah, so like I said, everyone's just really, there's a few strategies that we've been talking about, is like doing a more getting connected with all the agencies in the downtown east side around a better plan to how we're going to support people that are using and don't have services, how outreach is going to look, and connecting with other agencies around doing shift kind of outreach. You know what I mean? Because, agencies only work till 5 or 7 p.m. at night. We're seeing overdoses. We just had 3 or 4 in the downtown east side, Sherburne and Dennis, that have died in the late hours of the evening, right? So we're really trying to monopolize, you know what I mean, how we're going to address this as it comes on, And then, as you know, there is an injection right now with this proposed, you know what I mean, closure of the sites, and we'll know this week coming if that actually is going to stall. You know what I mean? But again, how does this look like for the people that have already signed on to these hard hubs, right? So even if there's an injunction that stops the process of these going forward, what do these new agencies do that have already received this money and are you know what I mean, slated for these new programs?
Yeah, I really love what both of you have shared about this. Like, it brings up so much around like service gaps and like the idea of undervaluing like lived experience and peer work, and like the role in harm reduction around building meaningful relationships. Like, that is like the core of the work, and that's going to be lost when we lose these sites, because it's this interwoven like community tapestry, I guess you could say, in connecting folks with community and a sense of belonging and a sense of being held, and that their well-being being valued in a dignified way instead of being dismissed. A worry that I see sort of twofold is I work really closely with a lot of the drop-ins, and not all drop-in staff are trained in harm reduction. But if you're a drop-in worker, you need to be a harm reduction worker, whether or not that falls under your job title. That's something that we're going to see like an uptick in folks needing to be able to respond and respond quickly and respond with compassion, right? And the other part that I really still can't get my head around, and that I worry that this introduction of like the correlation between, oh no, like there was gun violence, someone died, so we've got to get rid of this. It's absolutely connected. It's not connected. It was just a really unfortunate, devastating coincidence of where it happened. And these things aren't correlated at all. But now we have this introduction of the heart hubs. And I worry that this is our sort of parlay or sachet even into privatized forced treatment. And forced treatment doesn't work. Like I am living proof that forced treatment does not work. I am alive because of harm reduction and community workers. I really worry that we're going to start taking public money into these treatment approach, like very abstinence-based treatment approach, and we'll take public money into there, and it will become privatized. And we're seeing that in all other areas of care and education with our current government. And I worry that we are just further invisibilizing and disposing of marginalized folks. And we know that this is going to impact in like a rippling effect, right? As soon as we close the supervised consumption sites, which are healthcare, they're public healthcare, everywhere becomes an unsupervised consumption site, right? But yeah, I will pass it back over to the group.
People, opioid users, drug users, homeless people are being scapegoated. Definitely.
Me and another colleague at Street House, we did a consultation in the community a couple of weeks ago. So we interviewed 50 people, and we went to the different sites that are still presently open. And a lot of these questions were like, what is your reaction to the closure of these sites? A lot of people some people said, I'm going to lose community, I'm going to lose vital services, I'm going to lose some of my supplies. Um, and I'm fearing that I'm going to overdose. And, these were some of the responses. What are you going to do next? Well, so some of the people were like, I don't know what I'm going to do. You know what I mean? I don't, a lot of people are scared. A lot of people, like I said, fearing overdoses because of the toxic drug supply and not knowing what they're getting from one day to the next, not being able to test the drugs. But some of the responses were, we're going to have to, use together, you know what I mean? Really amplify that to make sure that we're watching over our community members and people that we share these spaces with. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of fear out there. You know what I mean? And right now, a lot of people, because they haven't really closed, we did get a lot of some responses like, I don't know, I'm not really thinking about that right now until that happens, right? So we got all this data. We're actually just putting it together now, just to get a better sense and hopefully sharing that with city and other agencies of how we can just work with people. You know what I mean? So we're all sitting here impatiently of what's going to happen next, right? So, and like I said, a lot of agencies, funding hasn't been the greatest for a lot of agencies. So, getting more manpower out there to making sure that people are being supported is another thing, right? So, that's where we're coming into actually working with other agencies to kind of amplify this outreach, amplify services where we can, you know what I mean, get people in the areas that people are using. And another thing that when talking with people, that because when I do night outreach, we see a lot of people still hanging in the places where they access these sites, right? So these are hubs too, where people feel comfortable, where they meet community, where they meet their dealers and buy their drugs. You know what I mean? So we're kind of predicting that people are going to still be somewhat in those areas because of access. But also, too, we're going to see a high presence of policing. We're seeing that now in those areas where they're starting to push people away. You know what I mean? Kind of, and which is really another thing that's making it harder for us as outreach to actually meet people where they're at and making sure that they have the supplies they need to use safely.
These sites have also transformed people's lives in terms of employment. And in terms of like access to upward mobility, I have a lot of clients that are worried that they're going to begin using again because they have been employed for the last couple of years, and it's allowed them to have structure. It's allowed them to be able to stabilize themselves. So, you know, looking at what the province is saying these heart hubs are going to be able to do, like these CSCs have been doing that stabilization work. They have been providing upward mobility and employment for people and a population that has had, you know, historical challenges with getting employment due to discrimination. And the fact that a lot of these jobs are based off of lived experience and not off of these, you know, these markers, these white supremacist capitalist markers of somebody who's educated or whatever, you know, it's like that has allowed folks to go back to school. It's allowed people to have access to so many different things. And I'm just remembering a conversation I had earlier this week with somebody who's she's very worried about what will happen once she no longer has a job, and how that's going to drastically shift her life and the lives of people in her community, right? Like her community now is she's surrounded by people that are working, people that have structure, and that structure, when that structure goes, they're all going to, their fear is that they're going to begin using again. And so it's just really unfortunate that this is the pathway that we've chosen to go down, knowing that harm reduction is evidence-based, knowing that harm reduction works, and knowing that our community and that it saves lives. It's just really unfortunate.
No, I do really want to honor your time. And like, thank you so much for coming to chat with us today. As my voice disappears, I think so much of what you've touched on, like, speaks to the power of community and the power of like the harm reduction principles of meeting people where they're at and like doing the least amount of harm possible. And so much of that is rooted in a sense of belonging and like humanizing folks. And so much of what we're seeing around the pushback around supervised consumption sites is like, just like covered in misinformation. Like, it's like, this is where you go and you buy your drugs. And it's like, that's not what's happening there at all. And so much misinformation around what harm reduction actually is. Because it seems like we can always like do like all the data and like the stats are on how like needle exchange programs and the impact that that's had on like mitigating the spread of like disease, right? Like we have so much data on that, but people don't seem to really want to hear that or be willing to hear that. And I think
it's stigma. It's easier to stigmatize people than to come up with solutions.
For sure. And I think so much of what you've shared today is really about the power of community and connection, right? Like everything in how we work towards shared liberation is rooted in like one conversation at a time, right? Like one really intimate conversation and a vulnerable conversation that like sees the humanity in all of us. So I really appreciate both of you. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
To all the people.
Hit the like button. Hit the like button. Subscribe.
Yeah, subscribe.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of the dogs for also joining. That was like a special bonus.
These dogs though firsthand. Hey, he says harm reduction saves lives.
Yeah.